All right. Good morning, everybody. Now you've had an impromptu coffee break, hopefully recaffeinated. You're very excited for mine and Josh's presentation here. So thank you for your patience. It's just ironic, that our power supply failed for this laptop. It was plugged in but not charging, and also because Josh is going to talk about batteries. So batteries are very important. So really we planned this whole shenanigan just to prove our point. Thank you, John. My name is Callie Edgren. I'm the Director of Sustainability at Assent. A couple of important things there. First is that many of you may know us formerly as Assent Compliance. The word compliance is no longer part of our name. Also, this is the first time for me since I've been working in this field since the mid-2000s. The first time I've not had the word compliance as part of my title, and my title at Assent is Director of Sustainability. And if I can go back, what I want to do for you today is redefine for you what product compliance means, to address this more sustainability-focused world and where we're going. Now, we're not going to talk about, I'm not going to talk about all the virtues of sustainability. I'm going to talk about the regulatory impacts and how that's going to be impacting you and your products and your markets and ability to sell your products. But I am a product compliance girl at heart, so just for those of you who aren't as familiar with this field, product compliance is really a technical discipline to make sure that your products meet technical requirements for the markets where they're being sold. As John mentioned here, you can see the big old CE in the upper left here. That would mean that this product could be sold in the European Union. The little mark right next to it, that's kind of like a stretched out C with a nice little stylized P in it. That's actually the new market certification requirement for Morocco. So Dell can sell this power supply in Morocco, and we could go around the globe and hit all of the different countries on there. This is product compliance. For Dell to sell this power supply in each of those different countries, it has to meet the technical requirements that country sets out for power supplies. And by the way, power supply is one of the most highly regulated types of electric equipment. Now, traditionally, for those of us who are on the older end of the spectrum, when we thought about product compliance in the past, it was very tied to product safety, mechanical safety, electrical safety. That's where the roots of product compliance really lie. But they have evolved over the years and definitely have taken on more of the environmental challenges of society today. I believe that John is going to talk about this a little bit more later, but if you're not familiar with this, the United Nations has a set of 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Not all of these are directly impactable by you and your companies, but there are definitely some areas here that can translate into regulations for companies, whether it's your operations or your products or the use of your products or the end-of-life disposal of your products. A lot of those things can tie back to these 17 goals. And so a lot of countries are aligning under these UN goals and starting to write regulatory requirements to support their commitments to these goals. And of course, that translates down into regulatory requirements for manufacturing. Traditionally, product compliance, again, focused more in this performance category. How does your product perform? Is it safe? But there are other areas of product compliance that are growing quite rapidly, again, often tied to those sustainability initiatives, reducing waste, things like that. Of course, we talk a lot in this room. We've already talked this morning quite a bit about composition. And certainly what your products are made out of is very important, and there are more and more regulatory requirements. But the end-of-life disposal of your products is very important. In fact, this area of regulation, which is called extended producer responsibility, is rapidly exploding around the world. I've spent a lot of the last year looking at new requirements in Canada tied to end of life, so this is definitely an area of concern. And of course, we have these other topics that I can't even necessarily categorize in the other three areas, but things like data privacy, right to repair, human and labor rights, and responsible sourcing. So these all translate to regulations that you and your company have to follow. So one way that a lot of regulators are approaching these UN sustainability goals and their commitments to things like the Paris Accord is to modify existing regulatory framework to shift towards what's called a circular economy approach. And the circular economy includes the continuous reuse of materials. So one of the things I'm going to talk about a little bit this morning is material efficiency and getting companies away from what's called the take, make, dispose approach or a linear economy into this circular economy where materials are reused from the end of their life back into new products. So this concept of material efficiency really applies throughout the life cycle of the product. These are just a few examples. And again, it's really common sense when you start to think about it. But it starts with a thoughtful design of your products, as all product compliance topics do. You really need to go all the way back. In fact, I think Chuck just mentioned, if you wait to get your PPAP to find out something isn't ROS compliant, you're in big trouble. Because first of all, you've already ordered all those parts, and now you're going to have to stop your manufacturing line while you go back. You have to go back to the very beginnings of your design phase, and that's how all these material efficiency requirements work. You can see the top box there, reduce hazardous substances. We get it. There's ROS, there's REACH, there's TSCA. It's, it's ever coming tsunami for us. But now you're going to start seeing regulatory requirements towards things like reducing the weight, using recycled material, or even using used parts back into the design of your products themselves. And again, these maybe have always been good design for environment concepts. What we're seeing is a transition from the conceptual good design practice stage to the regulatory requirement stage. And then you can go into extending the lifespan of products. And by the way, there is a huge movement called right to repair. If you're not familiar with it, you should. But that is intended to do things like this, make your products last longer. I just thought, I have had the same iPhone for 3 years. Like, that's got to be some kind of record, right? Extending the lifespan so that we're not just tossing our iPhones into the pile. So some of that is, of course, just designing a more robust product, but a lot of it ties into that repairability, upgradability, is our new things backwards compatible, et cetera. And then, of course, the useful recovery and application of materials at the end of their life. Are we able to recover those minerals out of the product and be able to reuse those in new products? And some of this ties to things like use of commonly available tools, right? You don't have to have that special tool that only that manufacturer has, or increase the ease of dismantling. I like to tell this story. Many years ago, I was visiting a waste recycler in Germany, and they were recycling monitors and televisions. And the owner of the recycling plant was telling me that an old monitor or television, a CRT tube, they could dismantle that completely, strip out all the valuable components, and et cetera, in about 30 seconds. But what he hated were the flat panels, because the flat panels come in, they're glued together. You can't use screwdrivers to disassemble them, and that took 2 minutes. So for this one recycling plant, his labor cost increased by 4 times to dismantle those products at the end of their life. And that was a huge problem for him, and it starts to disincentivize some of these waste handlers from doing that recovery work. So that's when I talk about ease of dismantling, is it is important that your product actually comes apart. You don't want it to come apart while the customer's using it, but you do want it to come apart easily at the end of the life, so we have to find that balance. I just threw a few screenshots there. There's a lot of NGOs out there holding companies accountable, right? So I know that these are not really our industry, but certainly they have no problem publishing, these guides for consumers on how companies are doing against these types of initiatives. One type of regulation that's being vastly modified in the European Union is the EcoDesign Directive. So if you're not familiar with the EcoDesign Directive, it formerly was known as the Energy Using Products Directive. But in 2009, the EcoDesign Directive was reformed, renamed. People think of EcoDesign as a movement, and it is, but it is also the name of a regulation. EcoDesign is a CE marking directive, by the way. So if your product's in scope, you have to meet these requirements. And thus far, it's been fairly focused on energy use. So even though they renamed it from energy using products to EcoDesign, the requirements were still very focused on the energy use itself. It does have a companion regulation called the Energy Labeling Regulation. In fact, I saw a snapshot on Brian's slide earlier of one of the EU energy labels. That is not a CE marking requirement, but it is associated with the EcoDesign Directive. So why am I talking about EcoDesign? Well, the EcoDesign Directive, if you read the bottom bullet, is one of the key regulations that's going to be leveraged for the new Sustainable Products Initiative in the EU. And a really good case study example is what happened to the EcoDesign Directive for displays. So displays, whether you're doing EOI displays for the side of a machine, like I used to work at a company called Rockwell Automation, and we had a lot of those touch panels, or any type of displays going into equipment, that has had to meet the EcoDesign energy efficiency requirements for a long time. But in 2019, they revised the EcoDesign measure for displays. And some of the new requirements are very focused on materials efficiency. So again, traditionally, just energy use, kind of like the Energy Star here in the US, but now they're starting to work material efficiency into this broader scope of what does EcoDesign mean. So now if you sell a display into the EU and it has to be CE certified, so it has to meet these EcoDesign requirements, any plastic components heavier than 50 grams have to be marked. There are additional material restrictions. So you're already dealing with RoHS and REACH. Guess what? Now there's additional material restrictions within the EcoDesign. So this is special for that specific type of product, the displays. They cannot have halogenated flame retardants. So this may be another substance family that you have to start collecting data on. You have to mark the flame retardants with what specific flame retardant is being used. They also have this cadmium label, which is very interesting because not only do you have to mark if cadmium is present, but you also have to mark if cadmium is not present. So either way, that's another mark that you have to put on your product. Now the cadmium's a little interesting because normally a display would be in the scope of the RoHS directive, which already restricts the cadmium at that same level. But a lot of those displays may be intended for products not in the scope of the RoHS directive. And so maybe those display manufacturers haven't had to worry about cadmium. So they're going to get caught by a different directive that isn't going to exempt them from that cadmium requirement. This is how the regulations in the EU start to overlap with each other as well. We see that sometimes with RoHS and REACH. Now we're seeing it with RoHS and the EcoDesign Directive for displays. You will also see that second to last bullet there is talking about the firmware on the product, right? So again, remember I talked about extending the life of the product. So that's a trick a lot of manufacturers use is maybe the hardware is fine, but we've already updated the software and that old hardware isn't going to work with it anymore. So now the EcoDesign Directive is not just touching energy efficiency, it's not just touching materials efficiency, but it's incorporating some of these extending the life of the firmware type of requirements too. So this is just one example of how the EU is using some of their existing regulatory framework to expand the concept of what is product compliance, what is a sustainable product. It's not just about the electricity being used anymore, but it's about all of these other areas as well. They do estimate that just last year, just on the energy side, They saved 120 billion euros in energy expenditure because of the products in the scope of the EcoDesign Directive. And so, of course, regulators are saying, how much more could we save if we just made all products do these things? And that is really where this sustainable products regulation is going to start to come in. If you're not familiar with EcoDesign, it may be because your products haven't been in scope. Your product's only in scope if there's a specific implementing measure for that type of product, like a motor. But this new sustainable products regulation is going to greatly expand the scope to nearly all products. So this is something that you need to be aware of and paying attention to. Again, you can see some of the requirements down there on the side. And one of the requirements that is starting to leak into a lot of the proposals out of the EU is this concept of a digital product passport. Which would have to have all kinds of different information about your product that's readily available for consumers to look at using a QR code. Now, lest you think, I don't sell in Europe. Thank goodness I don't sell in Europe. I don't have to worry about any of this. Of course, that's not true. So without going into a lot of details here, there are similar initiatives taking place here in the U.S., some at the federal level and some at the state level. For example, did you know that there are over 400 chemicals in products regulations at the state level here in the U.S.? So again, if you think you got a pass on Ross and Reach because you don't sell in Europe, good luck, because all those same substances are covered within these 400 plus regulations. Over half of U.S. states have already enacted or have at least proposed right to repair legislation, and last year President Biden also proposed that at the U.S. federal level. TSCA, of course, we already heard from TSCA, but that just continues to expand, especially towards articles, which maybe us article manufacturers didn't really have to worry about that much in the past. PFAS everywhere. I mean, we could have a week-long conference on PFAS. Regulations targeted by the Federal Trade Commission towards greenwashing, and that really leads into that last bullet. It's not enough for companies just to make claims anymore of their sustainability and environmental goals without being able to back those up. And that's where some of the SEC climate disclosure is coming through. And again, the SEC climate disclosure, to me, it has a lot of, I'm reminiscing from 2010 when the conflict minerals rules were first proposed, that everyone thought was impossible and they'll never actually make us do that. Well, to me, this is the next iteration. And I personally am especially looking at these Scope 3 emissions. Earlier this week, Josh made a comment about, was it Scania, has tied to executive pay the ability to reduce Scope 3 emissions in the supply chain. And just this morning, I read an article, Wendy's, I don't know if you saw that, they're doing the same thing. So executive compensation is starting to get tied to being able to manage these Scope 3 emissions, which supposedly account for 75 to 80% of the total emissions. So, just one more thing to be watching out for. But again, the concept of product compliance has expanded beyond, are you Ross and Reach compliant? So just to sum up, what are some of the impacts on the supply chain for you suppliers out there? These regulations are going to have impacts on you because your customers may start increasing your use of recycled materials or requirements for that because, again, they have to do that with their products. Additional substance restrictions, like I showed in the EcoDesign Directive, the halogen-free. Repairability requirements, no glue, right? Because those things that are glued together are much harder to disassemble, as well as guaranteeing that you will provide spare parts for repair. Reduced packaging materials, the reduced weight also translates into making transportation easier. Additional logistics requirements like increasing renewable fuels that are used by your fleets. And then finally, the ESG reporting, just asking your suppliers again about composition regulations, not that that's going to go away by any means, But the scope of things you need to ask your suppliers is growing exponentially, and it is going into this ESG realm. So again, no longer just enough to know what things are made out of. You need to know the fuller environmental impact of those. So with that, I was going to hand it off to Josh, but Josh isn't here. So I guess I will ask if there are any questions. I'm sure that he will be back shortly. Yeah? Anybody? Yes, thank you. Yes, sir.
We had the presentation from EPA here.
Yes.
And you then touched on it again, the thank you. The expansion of TSCA to articles. Maybe could you elaborate on that a little more, where we see that going?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it is a little different than, say, the EU REACH regulation, that there are certain aspects of REACH that don't apply to articles. Under TSCA, though, they have changed the definition of some of the reporting requirements to include the term imported articles, right? So even if the article itself would normally be exempt, what the EPA considers is that if you are importing that chemical to the United States, then you are responsible for that chemical. You're the one placing it on the market, not DuPont or the chemical manufacturer. So that's one way that they're expanding this scope, is by pulling this imported articles into the requirements. And that's part of the issue with the 10-year PFAS reporting that they're supposedly going to require. We have to go back 10 years and say how many PFAS you put on the market. But they've included that imported articles into that, which of course, I mean, how can you even begin to calculate, right? But I think also just under TSCA reform in 2016 under the Frank-Lautenberg Act, it just expanded the scope of TSCA, and we're starting to see the effects of that. So I think it is very much aligning a little bit more under some of the REACH type of approaches, but REACH doesn't generally, like Annex 14, doesn't generally apply to imported articles for the EU, but it does now in the US. So does that help answer some? Okay. Yeah, it was previously the toothless tiger is what people called US TSCA. I think those days are past. Was there another question? Josh is back, everyone. So thank you very much. Sorry.
Sorry about that. It's a little lightheaded. I had to get some water. So before I get started with my slides, I do have one piece of business to cover, and I got to apologize. So part of my role, I co-chair the Regulatory Compliance Steering Committee for AEM. I also do the same for a number of global trade organizations, and we need your help. So who in here sells products in Europe? Okay, a lot. Who sells products made out of metal? Okay, so this is where we need your help. So there is an exemption. It's expiring soon, and it's going to cost some money to renew. And we have about half the cost covered, and we need your help to cover the other half. If you're interested in this, get a hold of Jason Malcor.
Ross exemption, right?
Yes, Ross exemption. But even more than the fact that it's a Ross exemption, I would say that it kind of, how many Ross versions are global?
I'm up to 28.
28. Yeah. So it pays dividends to expand these exemptions. So we need your help. We need your financial help to expand this exemption. I think we have 2 months. So, okay.
Time enough for a bake sale if you need to have one.
Yeah.
Rummage sale.
Yeah, we could sell candy bars door to door.
Save our exemptions.
Okay, so this is a sculpture out front of the California Air Resources Board. So if the question was, what do you think about the future of fossil fuels? This would kind of tell the story. We know it's on a timeline. We know fossil fuels are on a timeline. But also, what that means is the technology to support fossil fuels are also on a timeline. So Cummins been around for 100 years, made its name, made money with internal combustion engines. And that technology is changing from electrification to hydrogen, but also the supply chain is changing. The risks are changing. The supply chain is changing. The materials are changing, and that means new risks. So the regulations have to change with it, and we have to evolve our processes to meet those challenges. So, we were talking about collecting data, but the question is why? Do I have to, and why now? This is part of the reason. Part of it is we have to disclose information to regulators. The other part is we have to give information to our customers. So this is a chart, we track this. We talked about the difficulties of communicating information to management. They don't understand the nuances of, regulation A, B, or C. The costs, they do understand. The customer requirements, they do understand. The line at the top is the number of requests we receive. The line at the bottom is the number we've answered. And there's always a gap. There's always a couple hundred gap between how many we've received and how many we've answered. I know I've talked to some of you.
Josh, I think we're going to take a break
Oh.
right here.
Okay.
We are at a point where we had scheduled to have lunch.
Oh.
So what we're going to do, and we had an hour and a half scheduled for lunch, a little bit more than that. So what I'd like to do, take a break here, do an hour for lunch, come back, and then we're going to finish with Josh, and then we'll get into the maturity model and all the other things we have for this afternoon. So if you don't mind being a little flexible in our schedule, we'll do that right now.
Anyway, I do want to try again on the exemption thing, that piece of business there really quick. So our industry, everything we sell, benefits from some form, fashion of exemption. And this is certainly true in Europe. There are a number of exemptions related to lead in steel, copper, and aluminum. We're on a timeline for these exemptions. They expire in 2024, July of 2024. We have to have our application in for continued exemption by January 2023. So if that sounds like a lot of time, it's not. We need several months to put arguments together, technical arguments, specific to the products the people in this room sell. This is an industry exemption. It pays dividends in many ways. One direct way is through the Ross regulation, but then there are a number because they get cut and paste, rinse and repeat. Kelly mentioned 28 or so globally. So those arguments that we make, they're important for others. Well, we need your help financially to make it happen. Cummins and others have bridged the gap halfway at about $50,000. We need another $50,000 to make it happen, and it's a heck of a lot lighter lift the more people that are involved there. And what we're going to do with the money is we're going to hire a third party who has a lot of experience with these exemptions to submit the application, create the technical arguments, and interact with the European Commission and their technical consultant on our behalf. Now that's important because they will be industry clients, not the client of one company or another. So we all benefit from this. We all, by financially contributing, you can also have your input into the outcome of this exemption. Again, lead and steel, copper, aluminum, there are a number of standards, material standards that spec this in. The supply chain is full of this material, and it's very much needed for machining purposes and other reasons. So the commission needs to know that we use this, that it's important for the things that plant our food, move our goods, things of that nature, gensets, electrical equipment, things of that nature. So if you have questions about that, I know this is a little bit off script here for today, but if you have questions about that, see me. If you're able to contribute financially, again, Jason Malcor is here. He's coordinating that effort. We're going to be working with sister organizations globally, Euromot mainly in Europe, and also the Engine Manufacturers Association in the U.S. So would love your support, and again, I'm here to answer any questions about that. So before break, we were on this slide talking about customer demand, and I think the last point I would make here is that it takes infrastructure. So to handle hundreds of these things a month, it requires systems to talk to each other, requires prioritization, requires a risk-based approach. We don't have all the information. We have tens of thousands of disclosures from our suppliers, that is true, but we have hundreds of thousands of components. So how do we relate that information back to give to our customers so they can make a decision about the compliance of their product? Something else, I know there's some in this room that are at different stages in developing your compliance programs at work. Our job initially was, tell me what you can't have in your product, what's prohibited or restricted, things of that nature. And materials regulation has moved on. It's sustainability, it's responsible sourcing, it's producer responsibility. And so when we look at a materials program at Cummins, for example, these are the things that we look at. And they're somewhat progressive in nature. You can see some of the things that we've been talking about, like materials due diligence, but it's really morphing into other things, air, soil, water stewardship. There's, of course, hazardous material declarations, but also carbon footprints, maximums. This is a data-intense exercise. It all starts with knowing what's in your product. You saw Brian's speech earlier today, 76% of the cost of our products is cost of goods sold. We spend more than $1 billion a month with our suppliers. A lot of this stuff is supplier design controlled. We can't get there without our suppliers. And certainly, we are expected to provide transparent information, whether it's electronic enforcement, QR codes becoming more ubiquitous, and then finally, digital product passports has been mentioned by several others today. But the point of all this stuff is it's kind of progressive. It starts with reporting. And certainly the EPA, SCIP database, things of that nature are examples of reporting. But what happens next? You report, and then it's controlled. Maximums, exemptions, life cycles, derogations, spare parts, all these things are kind of the next step in that. And then finally, it's reduction, whether it's carbon footprint, reducing, eliminating materials, things of that nature. So they all kind of follow the same progression. But there's a problem. And it's kind of illustrated here with our industry. We know that there's significant overlap between auto industry and particularly on highway. Maybe a little less with off highway, but certainly there's a heck of a lot more tier ones. I used to work for an auto OEM. We had hundreds of suppliers that we spent billions of dollars with. And now working for Cummins, who's both an OEM and tier one, we have several thousand suppliers. So there's a lot higher mix, a lot lower volume. The farther to the right you go over here, and certainly at the tier one level. But we all kind of use the same intermediary goods. We all kind of use the same feedstocks. But we don't specify the material down here, and certainly it's way down deep in the supply chain. So part of the issue is the regulatory accountability often lies with the OEM. The OEM is responsible for, at the passenger vehicle, end-of-life vehicle. We're responsible for ROS when we make a genset. There are, I can't even tell you how many regulations on products like this, and they're all at the OEM level. So as we've heard earlier, you get down here, it's like, I'm not telling you that, it's confidential. I don't have to. I don't make tanks. So it's for us to impose and provide tools, systems, processes to make it easier for this information to flow up, because the design control is down here. We specify performance, this elongation, this flame retardancy, things of that nature. We don't tell them what plasticizer to use. We don't specify the constituent materials necessarily that go into the electronics that we purchase. But getting that information is key to meeting the requirements. And this is a great example. We talked about several people have mentioned the battery directive. I've been watching that one closely for the last couple of years. Cummins, we are a battery manufacturer ourselves and of industrial and vehicle batteries, so it's important to us. The battery directive was passed, or at least the initial language. They're going through the compromise amendments now. It's not fully settled. We expect to hear more later this year. But probably anybody in this room who has designs on electrifying your product, you could be considered a producer under this directive. And being a producer, you have producer responsibility requirements. This directive is comprehensive and will serve as a model for future Fit for 55 regulation that's coming out because of its comprehensiveness, because it contemplates many things I'll discuss in a later slide. But I always like to talk about the reason why. So this chart, it was produced by the European Commission, and it just shows the growth in battery capacity expected to be placed on the market. So China, US, and Europe comprise the vast majority of the volume that's going to be placed on the market at a 1,400% increase from 2018 levels. So that's significant. 88% of this is going to be in vehicle mobility. So not necessarily cordless drills or handhelds or things like that, but vehicle mobility. But the chart on the right is who is going to be producing those batteries. And if you are a producer, you know that there's just not that many people that make the cells. So you have that kind of reverse funnel that I showed on that earlier slide, that we have to kind of work with these suppliers to make sure that they understand these requirements that we have as a producer placing these products on the market. So when you see this kind of increase, it causes other issues. So sure, we're displacing fossil fuel demand, all those regulations dealing with noise and heat and the materials that are used in internal combustion engines, but you create other problems like lithium. What do you do with these batteries at the end of life? This example here is a Cummins battery, which is used as an example in a city bus. There are 4 of these in a city bus. They weigh 1,000 kilograms apiece. So that's 1,000 kilograms of stuff that's got to get recycled at the end of 6 or 7 years or whatever the life cycle of this battery is. That is a completely different infrastructure than your battery bin at the office. I mean, it costs money for this, but is this worth anything at the end of life currently? Is that used material? Is there, just like the battery when you take it to AutoZone or the parts store or whatever, you got to pay a core charge. The new battery directive is going to create a market for that used material so that recycling is enabled. And it's hundreds of articles long, hundreds of pages of requirements for producers. These are just some examples. And, again, some old favorites, OECD due diligence, 12 months after transposition. Recycling and recovery rates for the used batteries at the end of life, which if you're a producer, you have to take back any kind of battery that comes back to you. So if somebody brings back a portable drill battery, it's your responsibility as a producer. Substance restrictions, of course, mandatory carbon footprint declarations. So not a nice to have, not a company policy, requirement of market access. Mandatory recycled content requirements. So similar to end-of-life vehicle, obviously this is a big growth sector for the automotive industry. Battery, no exception to this. So some of the constituent materials that make lithium-ion work, you're going to have to recover that and reuse it in new batteries. I can tell you right now, we've spoken to our cell suppliers. They just don't know. They don't know if there's going to be enough. Is that curve and the expansion and the used batteries going to be able to feed the new batteries that are being placed on the market? We just don't know yet. QR code labeling is actually mentioned explicitly in here. So this goes to that transparency. So someone can walk up to your battery, scan it, understand the hazardous materials, where to take it end of life, any sort of safety requirements which may be associated with that battery. And then finally, a battery passport. So, which is going to follow the battery, electronic, and condition of market access. So this is an unprecedented level of requirements under one roof, so to speak, this regulation, an unprecedented level of transparency. These are just some examples on the carbon footprint, and one that I find interesting because it's kind of the first entree into our industry. There are requirements for both the European Commission and economic operators. Now, sorry, that got a little screwed up formatting there, but these are likely to get pushed back because it's taken some more time to transpose the regulation itself. But you can see they're going to come up with the method for calculation, formatting and disclosure. And then it's our responsibility to kind of follow their lead in how this is disclosed. So there's some leeway. I guess we'll talk about that on this slide. But these are terms that if you're not already familiar, or your company is a producer, you need to become familiar with. So get them in your vocabulary. So product category rules. So these are peer-reviewed rules for the development of an environmental product declaration. So this is an opportunity, and one that's been discussed as part of the Sustainability Council. So other industries like the electric vehicle battery industry and CLEPA in Europe are developing something similar for vehicle batteries. Industries that have more consumer-oriented, like textiles and even beer, have created product category rules. And the industry only benefits by collaboration here. If we all as manufacturers go on our own, have our own rules for life cycle assessment, they could vary, obviously. And it's going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to cost a lot of confusion throughout our supply base. This is an opportunity for our industry to collaborate on what are the product category rules for equipment. And we're all going to save because of it. Of course, life cycle analysis, defining the carbon footprint at different stages. We talk about scope 3 emissions, but there are others. I think we're going to hear more about that later today. And finally, this is all wrapped up in an environmental product declaration. It says directive, but it should be declaration. This is what our customers want. So Brian talked today about, we have at least one customer that's asked for this. I think between when that slide was made and today, we now have 4. So we've committed to providing an environmental product declaration to 4 customers. And this is something that's been exponentially ramped up. You saw that customer request chart that we put up earlier today. That's just for materials related stuff. This has nothing to do with sustainability inquiries. But it's starting out very much like what we've seen with those restricted substance inquiries. So again, it's data intense. It's not something that you get on a Friday and you answer on a Monday. It takes months. So this is something that we're learning together as an industry and also with our suppliers. So, again, we rely on our suppliers, spending more than $1 billion a month with them, high degree of supplier design control when it comes to these products. Collaboration is key. So these are just some examples about specific things that we look to our key suppliers. Hopefully, some of them are in the room today. But, there are trade-offs here. This isn't always cheaper. It may have impacts to quality or durability. These are things that we have to consider. And it's not just who can provide parts the cheapest anymore. It's about who can provide products which meet the demands of our finished good customers and regulation. And that involves our direct suppliers, and it starts at the beginning. So as these technologies change, we bring new materials on board, new attributes of supplier design control. These are expectations that we're communicating to our suppliers. So it's a level playing field. It's not something that we compare after the fact to say, oh, by the way, I need you to have a sustainability program, or we need you to participate in product design workshops to lower carbon footprint on the material intense products you supply to us. It's things that we communicate up front. And I think, again, an opportunity through the Sustainability Council and AEM to use the reach there with those 1,000 members to share this expectation and what our industry wants. So it's not viewed as some of the things we heard earlier today as we were around the table, where it's suppliers saying, you're the only one asking. I don't have to do this. That's what we want to avoid. So in closing, if you are an OEM customer to Cummins, we want to partner with you. So we love to hear what your expectations are. You know, we want to know if you have your own goals for supply chain carbon reduction, if you have your own ideas to reduce material intensity. We want to incorporate those into our program so we can plan for the future. We have objectives of our own, and we can't get there unless our customers push us in the right ways to get there. And if you're a supplier, we want to partner with you as well. We want to hear your ideas. We want to know what you're working on, what your concerns are, so that we can address those. I think the AEM is uniquely suited in this regard. Again, I mentioned earlier that I co-chair other committees with global trade organizations, and there's not this level of collaboration with them. You know, the fact that we're in this room talking about supply chain sustainability is a big step, and one that I think we can really lead this industry. I'm glad that we're taking into account you know, what automotive has done before us. They have experience here, but we have our own unique challenges with thousands of suppliers and things of that nature. The fact that we're not coalesced around IMDS, that there's maybe other systems out there. I'd also add that unique in this room that we have an incredible talent pool of consulting services. You know, we have you know, Chuck Lepard from DXC, what a wealth of knowledge there. We have Brenda, Anita, Assent, Tetra Tech even. I mean, this is an incredible wealth. So if it's just your part-time job today and you're trying to figure out what to do next, the right people are in this room today to help you on what to do for the future, to help make the business case and quantify those next steps. It's really a great opportunity. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.